thanks everybody for coming along. Thanks to Skeptics for inviting us. So this is hopefully going to be a very interactive event. I'm going to speak for about 5 minutes defining parapsychology, and then turn over to Chris, who will define a normalistic psychology, and we'll each explain why we think these are worth studying. And I'm very much, we hope that this will become an open discussion, so we can have questions from you and interaction with you. So I'm with the Kersler Parapsychology Unit at Edinburgh University, and I've been there for 25 years now. We don't actually just do parapsychology, and we do some anomalistic psychology as well. So there is a bit of, this is slightly a false distinction. There's a bit of overlap between Chris and I in practice. But for the purposes of tonight, I'm going to focus on what parapsychology is and explain why I think it's worth investigating and studying parapsychology. So, narrowly defined, parapsychology is the study of hypothesized psychic or paranormal abilities. And these would include extrasensory perception, so that's mind reading, and clairvoyance, which is the ability to obtain information from somewhere that's hidden, it's not known to anybody else, for example, the contents of a sealed envelope. All of these are hypothesized abilities, I stress. Psychokinesis, which is mind over matter, and precognition, which is the hypothesized ability to foresee future events. And in all of these cases, parapsychology is testing the hypothesis, not that people are, well, obviously people are having these experiences. We know from polls and surveys that people have these sorts of experiences that they believe are genuinely paranormal. And we also know from psychology and from anomalistic psychology that in many cases there are most cases, there are perfectly normal explanations for these. But the parapsychologist and core parapsychology is asking the question, is there any truth behind this? Is there actually any genuine evidence for a genuine paranormal abilities? And there's probably two ways of going about asking this question. You can try to collect anecdotal reports and do field studies and observe people's paranormal experiences in the real world. Doing that is extremely difficult because it's a very noisy, complicated system that you're looking at. And therefore, most parapsychologists, when they're asking the question about psi, and psi is the umbrella term that we use to refer to these hypothesized paranormal abilities. Most parapsychologists end up almost backing into the laboratory situation, because in the laboratory they can start to eliminate some of the possible normal explanations that plague everyday paranormal experiences. So they can quantify the actual chance likelihood of someone identifying a target that's being concealed for them. So we could actually put numbers to it in the lab where we can't do in the real world, and we can eliminate other normal explanations such as sensory leakage if we conduct our experiments properly. If I was to make the case for why we should be studying parapsychology, it's because about 50% of people believe that they have paranormal experiences. And I think even if the vast majority of these experiences prove to be unparanormal and normal, we need to be sure that we can rule out the possibility of any paranormal experience, or if we should test that hypothesis, treat it as something to be taken seriously and carefully tested. So the reason why it's important to test that hypothesis is if there's any truth behind any of these experiences, the implications of us perhaps not being as insulated as we think we are, our ability to interact with the world being more extended than we traditionally believe, that has a lot of implications for our understanding of humans and for our understanding of physics as well. So the potential payoffs of discovering evidence for psi are huge. And that's why I think it needs to be studied. That was Chris.
Can can I just say, there's a couple of empty seats at the front if people want to move down a bit. There are a couple of seats there. Oh, fair enough. Thought I'd ask. Right. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that when we saw the kind of anomalistic psychology versus parapsychology, you know, it kind of sums up these images that we're going to have a huge row. We're not. Two reasons. One is that I think we do tend to actually think along quite similar lines, aren't we? Differences in emphasis between the activities of the anomalistic research, psychology research unit and the Koestler parapsychology unit. But it really probably is mostly a matter of emphasis. And secondly, that I am actually staying with Caroline. I want to have a bed together. So, I mean, I see the relationship between parapsychology and anomalistic psychology as essentially being a complementary one, insofar as I am actually a supporter of mainstream parapsychology. I mean, I think if parapsychologists can carry out well-conducted studies, and if they could ever establish that paranormal forces really do exist, and they could show that under well-controlled conditions with reliable, robust effects, that would be absolutely amazing. It'd be a fantastic breakthrough. I'm personally not convinced that they're close to doing that, and there are some lines of investigation that are more promising than others, I think. But that goes back to the thing that Caroline raised there, that whether or not paranormal forces do exist, there's no question at all that lots of people do believe in them. Lots of people report direct personal experience of the paranormal, and if we as psychologists have nothing to say about that, if we just ignore it or just assume that the paranormal forces don't exist and they pay no attention to it at all, we're missing out on a big part of human experience. I mean, and people make important decisions on the basis of these beliefs. Often they make decisions about health, about whether or not to invest, about relationships and all kinds of other stuff. So these are important areas. Now, the actual phrase anomalistic psychology, I think, is becoming a bit more widely used. I mean, I first kind of used it because I got sick when people said to me, well, what research do you do? I'd kind of say the psychology of ostensibly paranormal experiences and related beliefs, which is a bit of a mouthful. And so you kind of wanted something a bit shorter, and so I got opted for anomalistic psychology, which had been used by a few other people before that. And of course, people initially would just say, well, what the hell is anomalistic psychology? And then you'd have to say, well, it's the psychology of ostensibly paranormal experiences. But by kind of keeping on pushing it, it's now on the A-level syllabus, which I think in England, which is great. We are getting the message out there, and essentially what the approach taken within anomalistic psychology is, for me anyway, the approach I take is to look at all the other sub-disciplines of psychology and say, can they cast any light on the kind of things that I'm interested in? So, for example, I was in my talk the other night, I was talking about various kind of areas of cognitive psychology that have relevance, the way that different cognitive biases might lead people to think they've experienced something paranormal when in fact there are alternative explanations. We can also think of this from a developmental perspective. You know, our kids believe in all kinds of things: Santa Claus, ghosts, witches, monsters under the bed, etc., etc. Some of those beliefs they tend to shed as they get older, others they don't. You know, what's the role of obviously upbringing is incredibly important. Is it the case maybe that brains are to some extent pre-wired, have certain dispositions to believe certain kinds of things? Social psychology has got a lot to offer. The neurosciences, we know that the temporal lobes of the brain are involved in a lot of unusual, anomalous experiences. And you can go through, look at evolutionary psychology, all the different branches. I'm not going to waffle on about it for much longer, so I think it'd be more interesting just to throw it open as a Q&A. So if that's giving you a kind of general feel, I'm happy to throw it open, if we may. Yeah,
that sounds good. So does anyone have any questions to start us off? Mike?
What do you think of the kind of, you see all these investigations on TV, these investigations of ghosts and things like that. Do you think that's good for your field in that it attracts a bit of attention, or do you think it detracts from it quite a lot?
I think it's a difficult. I mean, the kind of programs I assume you're talking about are the ones like kind of Most Haunted and so on and so forth. And I mean, I think it's an interesting phenomenon from a sociological point of view. Why are these programs so popular? What functions do they serve for people? I think a lot of the time people watch them purely for entertainment, you know, and I don't think it's the case that everybody that watches those programs thinks it's all real, but there's a sizable, I don't know, I can go percentage, but there's a sizable proportion that do take it all very seriously, and far too seriously. Now, whereas I'm all in favour of kind of, you know, serious scientific programs or even religious documentaries addressing these kinds of things, those kinds of programs are problematic because they are playing to a particular audience. Now, I mean, I know because I've been the token skeptic on a lot of really, really awful programs, and I'm sorry, but, you know, as I said the other night, they pay me, the programs are fun to do, and if I don't do it, somebody else will, probably Richard. You know, I mean, again, in terms of whether they do kind of, you know, more good than harm or harm than good, I think it's a very difficult one to answer. I think it's best to at least try and have some scepticism injected into those kinds of programs rather than none at all. But no, I mean, I don't think they don't really they can give you some real understanding of it if you're actually on the inside while they're making the program, because then you can see the whole psychology of what's going on and the way it is all about people, you know, getting very, very psyched up and their own expectations and misinterpreting ambiguous things like little creak or anything like that. But I mean, I think we kind of knew that already, really. So in terms of scientific value, probably pretty near to zero.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the problem with these programs is that the public don't really realise the categories that the broadcasters are working to. So there are different strands of programming. There's factual and there's entertainment, and there's different rules that apply if you're making an entertainment program versus a factual program. And these, I think, come out of the entertainment strand, and that means they can be a little bit more, play a bit more loose with what's actually being viewed. And yet, because they've got a skeptic on, and because they've got, you know, they're filming it and so on, they make it look like an investigation. So they're blurring, the program makers blur the distinction for the viewer. Unless the viewer is quite savvy, the viewer may think this is a proper investigation, and actually it's an entertainment program. And for all we know, there's somebody behind the camera has thrown something over to the other side of the room. You're never going to see it, but it's going to make everybody jump, and that will start things happening. So I do think they're problematic from that point of view. I view them as a bit like professional wrestling. You know, it's just like circus. It's fun, but I'm not sure that all of the audience see it that way.